A tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 12 of the Power of Zero show. This is David McKnight. Glad you're with us again. For any of you who want to learn more about me and what we do here, the Power of Zero, you can go to davidmcknight.com. Today, I'm going to play for you an interview that I had with the Stacking Benjamins podcast. They're actually the number one financial podcast in the country, and this is an interview that I had with them a while back. So today, we're going to give you a chance to take a listen.
David McKnight, upstairs talking to Mom. He graduated from Brigham Young University with honors back in 1997. The past 20 years, he's helped put thousands of Americans on the road to the 0% tax bracket. Of course, you've seen this guy on Bloomberg Radio, the New York Times, CNBC, Yahoo Finance, NASDAQ, Reuters, Investors Business Daily, and all over the place. Of course, he's appeared on the main platform of Forum 400 and is a focus speaker at the worldwide meeting of Million Dollar Roundtable in Toronto, Canada. His best-selling book, The Power of Zero, sold over 140,000 copies. A book on taxes sold over 140,000 copies. The reason he's coming down to the basement, new edition coming out with all the changes, all the tax law changes. So we're super excited to have him here. David McKnight coming down to the basement. And coming down the stairs to the basement, David McKnight. How are you, man?
Good, Joe. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Well, I'm great. I love this idea of no taxes, right? We all love the power of zero, but this is kind of a scary thing because we want to get to zero for a lot of reasons that you talk about in the book. If you don't mind, you tell a story at the very beginning of the book that talks about why tax rates are going to go up in America. Why are they?
Yeah, so the story I tell right out of the chute in the book is about a guy named David Walker. He's a CPA. He was actually more than just a CPA. He was a former Comptroller General of the federal government. That means he was the CPA of the entire country for 10 years. He did that under Bush and Clinton, so he's totally nonpartisan. He has the ability to really just sort of look at the numbers and tell it like it is. And back in 2008, he appeared on a radio show and he said, hey, look, I got some bad news. He told the radio show host, his tax rates have to double or we're going to go broke. And she didn't believe him. So he said, look, I can give you a 4-letter word that explains why tax rates have to double. And she couldn't guess what it was. So they opened up the phone lines and people started to call in, and none of the callers could guess what the 4-letter word was to explain why tax rates have to double. I mean, it was kids, debt, wars, jobs. He finally told him, he says, math is the 4-letter word that explains why tax rates have to double. What does he mean by math? He's basically saying, look, if this is what your country is bringing in tax revenue, but only, you're spending double that, you either have to reduce spending by half, double taxes, or some combination of the two. So this is one of the smartest guys in the world saying that our tax rates have to rise dramatically or we're going to go bankrupt as a country.
And yet most of us are saving into tax-deferred plans where we're saying, I'm not going to pay the tax now. I'm going to wait until later, hoping that the tax bill down the road is a bunch lower than it is now.
And that's the irony of it all. I think, back in the 70s and 80s when tax rates were dramatically higher than they are today, that sort of strategy made sense. You get the deduction on the front end. You postpone the payment of those taxes until some point much further down the road and hope to pay that tax at a lower rate. That mathematically really makes sense. But we're now at a point where we just experienced the Trump tax cuts. Taxes really haven't been this good in a really long time. You could make the case that, the Bush tax cuts were a little bit lower, but the income parameters governing these brackets today are as good as they've ever been in probably 80 years. Yet we continue to pile money into 401ks and IRAs, getting deductions at historically low tax rates, only to postpone the payment of those taxes till some point much further down the road, when all of these experts are telling us tax rates are probably going to be much higher than they are today.
So you're saying, David, that if we're a family in America, what happened is we have less income coming in and we're still spending more?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to sort of liken this to the average American household, you've got 50 grand coming in, but your expenses are 100. and you keep piling debt onto the credit card, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. To put it in perspective for you, all your neighbors are getting their houses in order. They're all paying off their debt because things are going relatively well. But what are we doing as our household, which is sort of the federal government? We're just making it worse and worse and worse. So there's really no end in sight.
When it comes to the people on the other side of this, I love a phrase that you use. You say that we're in this game with the IRS. I think you call it a game with the IRS. They're our opponent, but the IRS can change the rules on us at any time.
Yeah. So it's like I say, when you put money into an IRA, it's a little bit like going into a business partnership with the IRS. And every year the IRS gets to vote on what percentage of your profits they get to keep. Doesn't sound like a great business partnership. So you could have $1 million in your IRA, but unless you can accurately predict what tax rates are going to be in the year you take that money out, you don't really know how much money you have. And it's really tough to plan for retirement if you don't know how much money you have.
Can we walk through the 3 different tax buckets that you have in the book? And I know there's so many concepts in the book, and obviously in 15 minutes, David, we're not going to get to all of them. So we'll have a link to the book in our show notes at stackingbenjamins.com, and we'll talk about where people can get it. But the 3 different ways money gets taxed in America, can you walk through those?
The first bucket, and I'll try to be brief. I'm not great at being brief, but the first bucket is basically what we call the taxable bucket. These are going to be like your emergency fund type things, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, money market CDs, savings accounts. This is what you need for an emergency fund. So basically 6 months worth of basic living expenses. That's what you want to have in those types of buckets. It's the least efficient of all the buckets out there because every year you get to pay a tax. If you amortize this taxation out over a lifetime, it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you have too much money in that bucket. So people say, well, what if I have more than 6 months worth of basic living expenses? I say, that's okay, so long as you recognize that there is a mathematical consequence associated with having too much money in that bucket.
Monster friction. So, you're talking about monster friction.
Right. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is the one that most people are familiar with. And it's what we call the tax-deferred bucket. These are going to be your 401ks and IRAs, 403bs, 457 SEPs, simples if you're a business owner. This is where you don't pay money as you don't pay tax as your money grows. You pay the tax on the back end. One of the problems associated with this bucket, like I mentioned early, you don't know what the tax rate's going to be when you take the money out. A second problem is that when you take money out, it counts as provisional income, which is the income that the IRS keeps track of to determine whether they're going to tax your Social Security. If as a married couple you have more than $44,000 of provisional income, then up to 85% of your Social Security becomes taxable to you at your highest marginal tax bracket. For a lot of our clients that we deal with year in and year out, if their Social Security gets taxed, it causes them to run out of money 5 to 7 years faster than people that don't have their Social Security taxed, because the act of compensating for all that Social Security taxation forces you to spend down all your other assets that much faster. So that's a pretty big deal. And it's not bad to have money in that bucket. You just want to have prescribed amounts.
Does annuity money also kind of gets your Social Security too, David?
Yep. I mean, to the extent that you hold your annuities in the tax-deferred bucket, you can actually have an annuity in a tax-free bucket where it would not count as provisional income. But to the extent that it's inside your tax-deferred bucket, all that income that you're taking out of your annuity counts as provisional income, potentially causing Social Security taxation. Which
brings up then our third bucket, which you spend a lot of time on in the Power of Zero, the tax-free bucket.
Right. So the tax-free bucket is everybody's favorite bucket. You pay tax on the front end. So the cost of admission to the tax-free bucket is you got to be willing to pay the tax today. So you use after-tax dollars, but once it's in there, it never gets taxed ever again. So we're talking federal tax, state tax, capital gains tax. You never pay that tax ever again. Not only that, but when you take money out of a true tax-free investment, it does not count as provisional income. So it would not count towards those thresholds which cause Social Security taxation.
I want to jump into those investments in just a second. But before we get there, it seems like you make a great case for tax-free income by saying, listen, tax rates are just going to go up. They're going to be higher in the future. Yet another way I think the government might change the game, which people have suggested before, is this whole idea that this Roth IRA money is going to be tax-free is also a game that could change, right? They could come back and go, well, you know what, the Roth, we need to change the tax code there too so that we'll tax a little bit of this money. What do you think about that?
Well, so that's a great point. A lot of people bring that up. You've got to look at the ratio of qualified plans or 401ks and IRAs versus Roth IRAs. It's about a 20-to-1 ratio. There's $21 trillion or so of money in the cumulative IRAs and 401ks across America. There's only about 800 billion of Roth IRAs. So, I mean, they could tax that and go against all of the promises they've made to America. And that would cause people to get voted out of office. But wouldn't it be easier for them to simply say, what would happen if we just raised taxes 1 or 2% on that 21 trillion? They'll say, hey, look, the tax rates have ebbed and flowed over time. We got to be able to increase taxes when revenue needs call for it. So not such a big deal to raise tax rates on that bucket. And it's a much bigger bucket.
Once again, easier math, right? Easier to get the math done to get the money that the government's going to need to stay in business.
That's exactly right.
So on the Roth IRA side, you must be a huge fan then of the Roth IRA.
Yeah, so the Roth IRA is really my favorite tax-free investment. And it's not just the Roth IRA, it's the Roth conversion, because Roth IRAs and Roth conversions are truly tax-free. You don't pay taxes on federal, state, or capital gains. And when you take the money out, it doesn't count as provisional income. So it's not going to cause you problems down the road for Social Security taxation. I don't think, as evidenced by that ratio I shared with you earlier, I don't think enough Americans are paying attention to Roth IRAs and Roth conversions. And here's the other issue that really worries me. January 1st, 2018, tax rates went on sale. They haven't been this good in a really, really long time. Every year that goes by where we fail to take advantage of these historically low tax rates by potentially doing a Roth conversion is potentially a year beyond January 1st, 2026, when the tax rates go up, where we may be forced to pay the highest tax rates we'll see in our lifetime. So really, I think that the message I really try to get out to people is that taxes are on sale. It used to be that I say, hey, some point in the distant, unknowable future, tax rates are going to go up maybe 10 years from now. Well, guess what? Now we know the year and the day when tax rates are going to go up. And so if we let this tax sale go by without taking advantage of it, we really have missed an opportunity.
So individuals and financial planners, as you know, David, are spending a lot of time only going up to certain tax brackets when they help clients or help themselves convert Roths over so that they pay the least amount of tax. So they'll go up to the tax bracket line. It seems like you're suggesting, screw that tax bracket line. It might be cheaper to do more today than it will be to hope that the future is going to continue the way it is now.
Yeah, I mean, if what David Walker says comes true and the tax rates double at some point down the road, then that 22% tax bracket that we currently have, we will look back at this moment in time and we will say, why did I not take advantage of tax rates while they were historically low? It will look like tax rates were on sale. We will look back and say, why did we not take advantage of that historically low tax rate?
There's another plan that you have here. I used it when I was a financial planner. You mentioned it in the book, the life insurance retirement plan. There's a huge segment of our audience, as you know, that's going to immediately go, oh my God, permanent life insurance. This is absolutely horrible. And yet you say when this plan is used correctly, this can be a really effective bucket inside of that tax-free area.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, you don't have to like life insurance. You don't have to like life insurance companies. You just have to like them a little bit more than you like the IRS, because in the end, somebody's getting your money. Ed Slott, who's done 6 PBS specials, he says over and over and over again, look, the tax benefit for life insurance is the single biggest tax benefit in the entire tax code. Not enough people are taking advantage of because they've got this stigma that life insurance is expensive. And I tell you what, when structured properly and when used in just the right situations, it's not going to cost you much more than your 401k on average per year over the life of the program. And it gives you some really interesting benefits like long-term care, it gives you a death benefit, it gives you some guarantees against losing money in the market. So I think in chapter 5 of my book, I really talk about why that is sometimes a good fit for people. It's not a good fit for everybody, but in the certain situations, it really, really is a great complement to Roth IRAs, Roth conversions, so on and so forth.
Let's talk about another project that you have based on the book. I heard rumor there's a documentary coming out that you're going to be a movie star.
There is a documentary. It's actually also called The Power of Zero. And what we found is that the number one thing that prevents people from making the switch from tax deferred to tax free is that tax that they have to pay. They're not convinced that tax rates down the road are going to be higher than they are today. So what we did was we went across the country and we interviewed the smartest people in the country relative to this debt debate. Okay, so we got $21 trillion of debt. We asked all of these PhDs, and we actually interviewed former Comptroller General David Walker, Larry Kotlikoff, leading debt expert out of Boston University, George Shultz, former Secretary of State. And we asked them, you're looking at the numbers. What do you see here? And they all said the exact same thing. Within the next 10 years, tax rates will have to rise dramatically, or we go broke as a country. So for those of your listeners out there who are thinking, hey, I'm not really that convinced that tax rates down the road are going to be higher than they are today, watch this movie and you're going to get straight from the horse's mouth. It's got a little bit of an apocalyptic feel because they talk about how bad a shape we are in as a country. But at the end, we give you some really good strategies on how to get your dollars repositioned to tax-free.
It scares me that the mathematicians and the economists like Mr. Kotlikoff are apocalyptic. Although I will say this, he can be apocalyptic, but he's also very entertaining at the same time, David.
Right. Now, he's very eloquent talking about something called the fiscal gap. And fiscal gap is not just the debt that we have, but what we've promised that we can't afford to deliver on. And those are what's called unfunded obligations. He tells us that our official debt to GDP ratio is 100%, but our actual debt to GDP ratio is 1,000%. And the next worst country in the world is Japan, and they're at 250%. So we are 4 times worse than the second place country in the world. And it's not even close. We're way past Greece. We're way past all of these other floundering countries. And while all of these other countries are getting their fiscal houses in order during this great economic boom, we're the only country in the world where our debt to GDP ratio is getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on.
The book is called The Power of Zero. We'll leave it on that high note, David. on that very promising note. By the way, yes. The new version of the book has a chapter on the 2018 tax cuts, how to get to the 0% tax bracket and transform your retirement. Ed Slott writes the foreword. Where do we find it at?
You can find it in bookstores starting September 4th. You can find it on Barnes & Noble. You can pre-order on Barnes & Noble, pre-order on Amazon. All the other bookstores will have it. You can pre-order now, but it'll come to your house on September 4th.
Out next week. Thanks for the time. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us.
Thanks for having me.